We're going to be finishing up lesson 3 tonight. But we do have a lesson 5. If you need any of the older lessons, there are green books up here. But we're going to be talking about casting the net from Luke 5 here in just a moment. We'll start with a little bit of review. We essentially are talking about learning to tie our shoes in this class. Learning to tie our shoes spiritually. Girding our feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace, equipping ourselves to effectively take the gospel to the lost world around us. And we'll review just a little bit over what we talked about in our study last week. We talked about the parable of the sower. We're talking about pictures of evangelism here in lesson 3. And the 3 illustrations that we see are sowing the seed, fishing for men, or casting the net, and shining our lights, or letting our light shine. But in talking about the sowing seed the last week, what do we learn about the work of evangelism from the parable of the sower? What are some things that you remember from what we talked about last week that you took away from that discussion? Okay, broadcast. Throw it out far and wide. What did you say, Shannon? Same thing? Okay. Yes. So something we're going to see with all of these illustrations is the idea of getting out far and wide. This sower evidently is not just standing in one spot. He is out casting the seed, and is he being very particular about where this seed falls? No. He's not looking for the exact right spot. He's not really even doing any work in preparing the ground. That's not our primary picture of evangelism. Our primary picture of evangelism here is he is just casting the seed far and wide, and the seed is really what has the power, right? The gospel is able to differentiate hearts. The gospel in its power is able even to soften hearts, to convict hearts, and to help us grow spiritually. And so what is my responsibility as someone sowing the seed of the gospel? What's the highest goal of my work in evangelism?
Really to sow it indiscriminately.
Okay. Sow it indiscriminately. Make sure that we are taking every opportunity to spread God's word. Is it my responsibility, is it up to me and my power whether or not the seed grows? No.
You sow, you water, it grows.
Right. If that seed does grow and it does bear fruit and somebody is brought to the Lord, that's not to my credit or to my glory, right? It's to the Lord's credit. It's His power to save. And in the same way, if it doesn't grow, that's not necessarily a reflection on my role as a sower. Now, again, that doesn't mean we don't need to look at ourselves and see whether or not we might be getting in the way of the gospel. But I think the highest goal of evangelism is for us to get out of the way of the gospel, to make sure in our demeanor, in our character, in the way that we're communicating the gospel clearly, and that our lives are consistent with the gospel and its power, and reflecting that power. And so it's not within my power to cause the seed to grow. That's the power of God, and the seed will differentiate hearts. We shouldn't be surprised that there are some who are going to encounter the seed of the gospel and reject it. How should we measure success in evangelism then? I mean, I think in one sense, certainly, what we're trying to accomplish, our goal is bringing people to the Lord. And so in one sense, we can see that as success, people coming to the Lord. But Is that kind of our measure of success? How many people are baptized? How many people, end up becoming part of this local church?
Well, I would say it wouldn't be necessarily the amount of numbers, it's who obeys and who understands and who follows to go to heaven, that's what we're wanting to go to heaven, so we're focusing on not as many people. I mean, of course, it's nice to get more people, but it's just not to get them in the doors, it's to get them,
Right.
Understanding, and not just blindfolding and baptizing or something, it's to get them to understand, and have a right relationship with the Lord and stuff.
Right. So even where we may talk about numbers, we're not talking about numbers in this building, right? We're talking about numbers in heaven, those enrolled in heaven, those who are disciples of Jesus Christ. That's the goal. But as far as I measure success in my work of spreading the gospel, I think really the question is how faithfully and how consistently am I spreading the seed? And so, and if I am doing that faithfully, and I am spreading it far and wide, then that I am being successful in the work that God sent me to do. So I think while certainly we desire lost souls to be saved, God desires lost souls to be saved, and that is the goal. We can faithfully do what God intended for us to do, and that ought to always be the result. And so let's measure the value of what we're doing primarily by how faithfully, how consistently, how far and wide we're spreading that seed. Comments or questions on that we covered last time? Okay, let's move on. We read Luke 5 last time. Let's read it again as we talk about this idea of fishing for men or casting the net. So Luke chapter 5, starting in verse 1, we read, "Now it happened that while the crowd was pressing around him and listening to the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. And he saw 2 boats lying at the edge of the lake, but the fishermen had gotten out of them and were washing their nets. And he got into one of the boats, which was Simon's, and asked him to put out a little way from the land. And he sat down and began teaching the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, 'Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch.' Simon answered and said, 'Master, we worked hard all night and caught nothing, but I will do as you say and let down the nets.' When they had done this, they enclosed a great quantity of fish, and their nets began to break. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat for them to come and help them. And they came and filled both of the boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw that, he fell down at Jesus' feet, saying, 'Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man.' For amazement had seized him and all his companions because of the catch of fish which they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, 'Do not fear. From now on you will be catching men.' When they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him." Okay. So Luke 5 gives us kind of a thorough account of this. In some of the other Gospels, we see this idea of no longer will they be fishing for fish, but be fishing for men. But here, what excuses might Peter have given not to obey the Lord's command?
He's tired.
Okay, he's tired, he's exhausted, he's been fishing all night. What else?
I've already tried to.
Yes. Not only is he tired from fishing all night, he's discouraged. There's no fish out there. We tried all night and didn't get anything. You think trying it again is going to work out? What else? What were they doing on the seashore when Jesus asked them to put out a little from the land? Cleaning their nets. We just clean the nets, right? And you want us to get them dirty again? What else? What was Jesus's earthly profession? A carpenter. What was Peter's earthly profession? A fisherman. Who do you think's gonna, from an earthly perspective, know more about fishing? Yeah. you know, Jesus, you may not know how we normally do this. I've heard, I'm not sure about this because I've heard conflicting things, but I've heard that the best fishing was at night in the shallow water. Here, they put out into the deep in the middle of the day. So perhaps that's not even the best tactic normally in fishing. So all of these reasons that he could have not cast the net, but why did he choose to obey anyway? Because Jesus told them to. Nevertheless, at your word, some versions say, I will cast the net. And when they do, when he obeys at Jesus' word, what happens?
They caught enough fish for 2 boats, but they ended up following.
Yes. And so this was teaching them. We talk about miracles and signs. Very often the miracles is teaching a truth. It is a sign pointing to a message. And I think we see the same thing here. It's pointing towards a spiritual truth of what they are about to undertake in fishing for men. But when they obey Jesus' words, they cast the net, they fill the net so much that the nets are threatened to break. They put it in these 2 boats, and the boats can't even hold it all. How many times do you think they cast that net through the night? And now in one cast, all of a sudden, they take in more fish than they probably had taken, and how many days of fishing would it have normally taken them to catch that much? I don't know. But I want us to take that occurrence and apply it spiritually, because Jesus goes on to apply that spiritually. From now on, you are going to be catching men. You're going to be fishing for men. What kind of excuses might we be tempted to make in fishing for men that might parallel Peter's situation?
I'm tired.
Yeah, I'm tired. We're exhausted. Maybe we're exhausted because we've been trying to fish, and maybe we're discouraged. Maybe we think we've already tried that, it didn't work. We get discouraged, and people just aren't interested. Maybe we're tired because we're doing other things. William?
Maybe we're nervous. We are kind of out of our comfort zone, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
That could be part of it, maybe.
Right. Yeah, I think for us, certainly we can be nervous or fearful. We think, well, what's going to happen? It's not going to work. Go ahead, Robbie, did you have a comment?
Using our eyes and not our heart. There's some really good looking fish over there. Don't want to mess with those fish. They're kind of small.
Right. And I think this is one thing about fishing. In most cases, do you see the fish that you're fishing for? In most cases, they're under the water. Fishing is an act of faith, right? You don't know where they are, but you cast the net and trust that they're out there somewhere. And so not acting based on our eyes, not walking by sight, but walking by faith. We don't know. Do you know, out of the 45,000 people in Phelps County, do you know how many of them might actually respond to the gospel? There's only one way to find out, right? We cast the net. And we don't know. We don't know where they are. But we cast the net, trusting that Jesus has the power, ultimately, to bring them in. So maybe we're tired. Maybe we think nobody's interested. We've tried that. We're discouraged. Maybe we have other things to attend to, right? We just cleaned the nets. This is really not a good time for us to try that. Maybe we're busy doing other things and don't want to be inconvenienced by the work of fishing for men. Maybe in our case, we don't feel like we are well trained. Fishing is just really not my thing. I don't know how to do it the right way. Go ahead.
We could be like Moses and say, who am I? We got a preacher, we got the elders. They're
Right.
more versed in this.
Right. Let me ask you this. So if anybody didn't hear it, Shannon said we might say, who am I? The preacher or the elders, they can do that. Let me ask you this. Did Peter do anything that any other man out there couldn't have done in this situation? Did he bring some special qualifications to the table that like Peter was the right man for this job? I guess I say that, I don't know, casting a net might be kind of hard. Maybe not everybody could do it on their first try. But essentially, there was no knowledge that Peter brought to the table that, caused him to choose the exact right place in the right time. And no, he just did what Jesus said to do. And I think if we didn't already get the point with the sower sowing the seed, right, it's not some special farming knowledge that brought about the growth of the seed. It's not some special fishing skill that Peter brought to the table that caused this catch. In fact, when he was relying on his own skill, how many fish did he get all night? None. So obviously it wasn't his skill that brought in all these fish. It was the power of Jesus. So again, it's the power of the seed. It's the power of Jesus. It's not about us. And so when and if success comes, it's not to our glory and credit. We just need to be faithful in casting the net. Go ahead.
An illustration Brother Banning used was, we're the Amazon driver. We're just delivering the package. We're not.
Yes.
That's what we do.
Yes, I think that is a really helpful illustration. Jesus didn't have that illustration available to him, but he probably would have used it if he did. No, we deliver. We're the Amazon driver. We deliver the package. The goods, the package isn't ours. It's the Lord's, and we need to make sure that we faithfully deliver. Maybe we get in the way. Maybe we're kicking the package, or not putting it in the right place. But faithfully delivering the message is the goal. What does the illustration of fishing for men teach us about our efforts in evangelism? We talked about this. I bought this net a few years back, and I figure if we're going to talk about it, I better get all the use that I can out of it. So when we net fish, right, we're not talking about bait fishing. That wasn't the normal way of fishing in the New Testament. Normally, it was a net, and it wasn't, a little net that you pick up bugs out of your pool with, right? It was a net. This one is, I think, 8 feet radius, so 16 feet diameter. What skill is involved in this kind of fishing? What's the goal?
Spread over as much area as possible.
As far and wide as possible, right? And so it's not about some special technique aside from getting it as far and wide as possible. The same with sowing. If anybody wants to come and see how big the net actually is, you can come and look at it afterwards. Aside from just the same with sowing, it wasn't some special method. It was getting it as far and wide as possible. In the same way, our goal is to spread the net as far and wide as possible. Practically speaking, what are some practical ways we can more effectively cast the net in evangelism? How do we do that?
Have faith in God.
Okay.
That what we're doing, this is His will. He would have all men to be saved.
Right.
And so we have faith that going by that, people will hear the word, the seed will be sown, and with hope that much will flow.
Certainly. So we trust in God's power, not our own. How do we make sure this net is not this big, but is as far and wide as possible? What does that mean, practically speaking, Jamie?
Put it into your daily life. So don't just spread the gospel like 1 hour every week. Make it something that you do each and every day with everyone that you encounter.
Okay, so a more constant awareness of opportunities to share the gospel. Every person that we encounter day by day is an opportunity to be an influence, to start a conversation that might lead somebody towards the Lord. Go ahead, Shannon.
In today's society, our options are limitless. We can reach the whole world in a matter of seconds.
Right.
We can push a button and broadcast whatever we want.
Yeah, you think about what are some ways that we can broadcast the gospel? As Shannon said, there are a lot of tools available to us. The internet, as damaging as things can be on the internet, as we're able, we need to be using it for good, right? To spread the message, to make it available to as many people as far and wide as possible, that they can come in contact with the saving power of the gospel. What are some other ways that we can do that, maybe even more locally? Go ahead.
You need to study that you can effectively present the gospel in a way that will benefit people.
Right. We do need to learn to communicate it clearly. We're going to talk about in not lesson 4, but lesson 5. Well, one of these lessons. Maybe it's lesson 6. I can't remember. We're going to talk about what is the gospel. And what exactly is it that I'm supposed to be communicating? There's a lot in here, right? And so what is it that I need to communicate? So that certainly is going to be part of equipping ourselves with the preparation of the gospel of peace, is knowing what exactly that is that we need to be communicating.
This isn't me, but all of the ladies at Rich's Famous Burgers have heard from Carol and have been invited, and more than once. I think she's agitated. But, talk to everybody.
Right.
You never know who will be yours.
Right. And so we'll talk in our next outline about come and see evangelism. I think kind of step 1 is trying to invite people towards an opportunity where they can be more fully exposed to the gospel. And finding ways to do that, whether that be inviting to services, inviting to some Bible study, inviting to have a personal Bible study, directing them to our website. There are many different ways that we can do that. But when we find some way, some invitation that I can give somebody to be more fully exposed to the gospel, then I need to start sowing it. I need to start spreading it far and wide, whether that be on my social media page, or whether that be through the mail or email, or certainly I think one of the most effective ways is personal interactions, and equipping ourselves to where when I have a conversation, I have something I can say, I have something that I can invite them to. So let's think about that. There are, I believe, about 45,000 people in Phelps County. How many of them have we touched in some way with the gospel, or an invitation to hear the gospel? And how many of them might respond? We don't know, right? This is the faith of not knowing where the fish are, but casting the net out. And let me mention something else. I don't like making too many parallels between evangelism and marketing, because I think they're very different things. But I think there is some parallel when we think about this kind of invitation for people to come and hear the gospel. Most advertising, somebody needs to see an advertisement a minimum of 8 or 9 times. I don't know, might be able to tell us more about this, but before they will even look into what it is. You think about some of the advertisements that you see, how many times do you see them before you actually respond to them? I think sometimes we think, I gave somebody an invitation to the gospel and they didn't respond, my job's done. Well, many times, it's not even the 7th or 8th time until it actually registers and they're actually thinking about it. It actually sticks in their head. And sometimes it's not until about the 20th time that they see an advertisement that they actually get all the way to responding. So we think, well, we've reached a lot of people in this community. Well, how many times have we reached them? Let's reach them again, and let's reach them again. Let's continue to sow that seed. Go ahead, Josh.
And I think it may be true a little bit too that, like for Connor, if he sees an advertisement one time, that's all it takes. It's like he can be reeled in with one
Yes.
So my point being that the younger people are, the less advertisements it might take. But as people get older, it seems like, well, it's gonna take a little bit more to attract them. So maybe that's true too, that the younger you can put the gospel in front of people, the more easily they'll be able to receive it.
Right. And I think it will vary as well. Maybe somebody is primed and ready and is looking, and this advertisement is just what they need to respond, right? If you, for instance, and again, I apologize for making parallels between marketing and evangelism, but if you need your roof replaced, right? You could have had an advertisement for roofing workers show up at your door or in your mail a bunch of times before, but now all of a sudden when you need it, now that you get that advertisement and it's going to stick with you, right? We don't know exactly where people are at in life. And it may be sometimes people are at a place in life where they're not interested in hearing that advertisement. They see it, they throw it in the trash. They're not interested in that invitation. But there may be people who they know they need something. They know that they're looking for God. And may it be some invitation, some come and see evangelism that we have put out there that is what they decide to respond to. Other comments or questions on that?
I've had a lot of people tell me that they've done so much bad in their life, God don't want anything to do with them, and I'm like, no, you're wrong. Yeah, he does.
Yeah. Jesus starts his very first major teaching in the gospel, Matthew chapter 5, by saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," right? Recognizing our need for God needs to be square one, right? So certainly, people who think they're too bad for the gospel, we need to be giving them that message that it starts by a recognition of our spiritual poverty.
If you think about John the Baptist, I'm sure he was an impressive person with let's see, what did he wear?
Camel's hair and a leather belt?
Yeah. And honey dripping out of the corner of his mouth, that's what he's eating. Honeycomb, and probably a big beard. And what kind of a sermon did he preach? He preached hell far to those people, and he couldn't do any miracles or anything. He just preached to them, and look what thousands flocked to him, because he preached what he preached. They knew they were sinners, and that's what he preached.
Right.
And he had a lot of influence.
Certainly. So we need to faithfully preach the message. It's not about us being attractive, right? John the Baptist wasn't attracting people by the clothes that he was wearing or anything like that. But the message is what they needed. And so we need to faithfully proclaim that message. Any other comments or questions on fishing for men? We're going to continue some of this discussion and talking about letting our light shine. Okay, let's look at Matthew 5, verse 14 through 16, our third picture of evangelism or illustration here. In Matthew 5, starting in verse 14, here we read, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." Do you see any similarities to this picture, to the other two pictures that we've just looked at? In sowing the seed, we talked about we're broadcasting the seed of the gospel. In fishing for men, we're talking about we're not just bait fishing, but we're net fishing. We're again broadcasting it as far and wide as possible. Do you see a similar picture here with shining our lights? Where is the light supposed to be?
Set up where it will shine out.
Right. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do we take a lamp and put it under a basket, but we put it on a lampstand. Both of those illustrations show us this idea of lifting light up to where it reaches as far and wide as possible. In fact, think about the room that we're in right now. Where's the light coming from? from above us, right? When they built this building, why didn't they just put the lights in the floor? You know, do you normally do that? No, we lift it up as high as possible because that's going to spread out and illuminate as much as possible. And so, we don't put our windows down at ankle level, right? We put them up above at eye level or above where it's going to let light in. And so, in the same way, we see this idea of lifting our light up so that it reaches as far and wide as possible. Maybe an illustration that we can think of is a lighthouse. Why do they make lighthouses so tall? Right. They're not going to build a lighthouse and put the light down here at ground level. They're going to lift it up tall. And in the same way, they don't know exactly where the sailors might be out there. But the higher up they reach it, the farther it's going to reach. Wherever they might be, they're going to see it. In the same way, we, in letting our light shine, are told that we ought to be lifting it up. We don't know who our influence might touch. We don't know who might see the way that we are living and be changed by it. We just need to make sure that the way that we're living, we're lifting it up so that people as far and wide as possible can see it. And what types of things should other people in our lives see in our lives that would motivate them to glorify God? What does the passage say? That your light shines so that it may see what? Your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. What do you think that's talking about? Serving? Yeah. I think it's interesting. Jesus here in the sermon says, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Who is he talking to? In context of the Sermon on the Mount, who is the you? Okay. It says his disciples had gathered around him. There in verse 1. And right before this, in the Sermon on the Mount, what did Jesus just finish describing? Blessed, the Beatitudes. Jesus there describes what we might call the character of kingdom citizens. Right? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek, those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. The merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. And then he makes a transition in verse 11, and he starts saying, blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Then verse 13, you are the salt of the earth. Who's the you? Yeah. The disciples, the people that he's just finished describing, right? And so I think when we think about, at least in the immediate context, what kind of light we're shining, think about things like being a peacemaker. Think about things like being merciful, like being meek or humble. Think about things like having hope and joy in the midst of suffering. That's what he just finished describing. I think it probably goes beyond that, but I think that's a good starting place when we want to think about what kind of good works people around us ought to see in our lives. And let me ask this, and I want to be careful about how I phrase this, because I don't want to undermine the importance of any of the things I'm about to talk about. But will most people in society be motivated to glorify God because I don't drink? Would they look at that, and most people in society look at that and be motivated to glorify God?
I think they're more apt to make fun of you.
Right. Would most people be motivated to glorify God simply because I pray and read my Bible? Again, I'm not at all undermining the importance of these things, but I want to make a point. No. As important as those things are, that we don't get involved in the things of the world, and that we are involved in the things of God and growing in a relationship with Him. When we talk about this illustration of shining our lights, when we talk about our good works, I think in particular we're talking about things that even the world around us would look at and see as, different in a commendable way. We'll talk in just a moment about what some of those things might be. But shining our lights isn't just about what we don't do, and it's not just about our religious involvement. It's about actively pursuing good works in serving other people and reflecting the character of Jesus and the way that we interact with the world around us from day to day. And let's ask this question as well. Can good words or good works accomplish that on its own? It says they will see your good works and they will glorify your Father in heaven. What if it's just good words? What if I'm just teaching? And I'm teaching the truth and I'm teaching the gospel. Is it that within itself, is that going to accomplish this? No. Obviously he says they need to see your good works. What if I just have good works though? And I don't teach the gospel. I don't point towards the source of that transformation in my life. Then what are they going to be motivated to do? They see my good works and they say, great, he's a great guy. I'm really, thankful for him. He's a good example, right? It takes both. We can't just be saying the right things and not be living in a way actively pursuing good deeds to shine God's light to those around us. But we can't be pursuing good works and not be speaking up for where those good works come from. We got to connect the dots between the two. And so it takes both. Comments or questions on those ideas? Josh.
In 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, Paul says, having so fond an affection for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel, but also our own lives.
Definitely.
That's very much that idea, that not just those good things and those good words, but also our own lives, our service to you.
Right.
That's what he's talking about.
Right. So there we see an example in Thessalonians of Paul communicating not only the gospel, but giving their lives to these brethren and reflecting the gospel in the way they lived day by day. Let's talk for a moment about some different passages that tell us different ways that this should actually happen. That people should see something about us and be drawn towards the Lord through it. You might be able to think of some additional passages besides the ones that I have on the screen, but let's just briefly look at each of these. Look at John 13. John 13, verse 34 and 35. After washing his disciples' feet, Jesus here says in verse 34, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Okay, so here Jesus points out something that people are going to see about us and know that we are followers, disciples of Jesus. What is that something?
Loving one another.
Our love for one another. And I think this probably does apply as well to our love for people in general, but I think he does specifically say our love for one another. The way we treat each other as disciples should shine God's light. People should see the way that the St. James Church of Christ functions as a family and loves one another and supports one another, the way that we are knit together in love. And they should say, that's not normal. The world doesn't produce that, right? We need to reflect Jesus' love in the way that we interact with one another. That's one way. Very clearly, Jesus says we're going to be shining his light. Look in John 17. We'll pause and talk about all of these in a moment, but I want to go ahead and look briefly at each of them. John 17, 20 through 23. Later on in the same discussion with his disciples, Jesus says, I do not ask on behalf of these alone. Here he's praying to God. He says, I do not ask on behalf of these alone, but for those also who believe in me through their word, that they may all be one, even as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. The glory which you have given me, I have given to them, that they may be one, just as we are one. I and them, and you and me, that they may be perfected in unity, so that the world may know that you sent me, and loved them even as you have loved me. How does Jesus say here people are going to know that Jesus was truly sent by the Father? How are they going to believe that Jesus was truly sent by the Father?
People are like-minded, those who follow, no division.
Right. They're going to see a unity that comes from, notice verse 22, the glory which you have given me, I have given to them, that they may be one, just as we are one. Jesus has given us something glorious, by which we can have a kind of unity that the flesh can't accomplish, right? Think about the world that we live in right now. Think about politics right now. Is it normal for people, maybe from different backgrounds and different experiences, is it normal for those people to get along and come together and be unified? No, we see how divided our country, the world that we live in is. That's not normal. And yet, when people that are Jew and Gentile, people that are rich and poor, people that are coming from different backgrounds, people that are speaking different languages, can come together and find a unity that the world isn't able to accomplish, it shows us there's something more going on here. That's essentially what Jesus is saying, is that they're going to see your unity, that you are unified just as I and the Father are, that you're unified in us. And they're going to say, how did that happen? There's got to be something to this Jesus message. Comments or questions there? Okay, we'll come back and talk about that more. Let's look at our last two passages here. Philippians 2. Philippians 2 and verse 14 through 16. This specifically uses the illustration of our lights shining. It says in verse 14, do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God, above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world, holding fast the word of life, so that in the day of Christ will have reason to glory, because I did not run in vain, nor toil in vain. Okay, what does he say if we want to appear as lights in the world? What does he tell us we need to do? What does he say we shouldn't do? What does he start with? Grumbling and disputing. Maybe we're stepping on our own toes here. Do you think grumbling and disputing is ever a problem in the Lord's church? Yeah. It is very easy for us to allow the influence of the flesh, the worldly mindsets to creep in, and when things aren't going the way that I think that they should go, and so didn't, handle this situation very considerately, and, I think we could have done this better, it's very easy for us to begin grumbling. Have you ever been guilty of grumbling about somebody in the church? Yeah. Are you raising your hand that you are, or no? Okay. Sorry, Mike. You should wait until I finish my question before you raise your hand. Well, I will raise my hand. Sometimes we become guilty of grumbling, and often grumbling and disputing go together, right? We have to get rid of that. That's not the heart of Jesus. That's not what God desires of us. We're not going to shine God's light the way that we need to, if that's the kind of attitudes that we have. Go ahead, Mike.
Carol says this all the time. Have you ever heard someone complain or grumble and be glad that you heard it? Ever?
Yeah, definitely. And so, the early church had some difficulties that they needed to work through. Were there any conflicts in the early church, in the book of Acts? Did they have any difficult things they had to work through? Yeah, the church in Corinth, read that book. They had a lot of things that they needed to work on, right? Even in Acts, very early on, Acts chapter 6, the Grecian widows believe they're being neglected. They believe there's racism and discrimination going on in the church. You want to be part of that church? Well, the elders stand up, the apostles stand up, and they essentially call a congregational meeting. They gather together all the disciples at the beginning of Acts 6, and they say, okay, let's talk about this. Let's work it out. It's not that we're seeking to be a group of people that is free from any conflict. That's not going to happen. We're going to have conflict. We're going to have disagreement. But may we be the kind of people that handle that in a way that is different than the way that the world handles it, right? That reflects the heart of Jesus. It's not that we're peacekeepers, we're peacemakers. You can't be a peacemaker where there is no conflict. Did you realize that? Being a peacemaker means where there is disagreement, where there is conflict, we're the kind of people that go in and help resolve that. And so, very clearly, John 13, John 17, Philippians 2, some of the things that are focused on when it talks about our influence on the world around us is our love, our unity, not grumbling and disputing. It does mention here as well, verse 16, holding fast the word of life. We talked about it can't just be the good deeds. We have to connect the dots with where that's coming from. And so it has to be God's word. Let's look at one last passage since we're running out of time. 1 Peter 3, 14 through 16. Starting in verse 14. We read, "But even if you would suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed. And do not fear their intimidation, and do not be troubled. But sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. And keep a good conscience, so that in the thing in which you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ will be put to shame." Okay, even if we're being who we need to be, people are still going to slander us, right? They're going to say bad things about us. We might be persecuted. But here we're told not to fear. Rather, we're to act in such a way that people should ask us what? A reason for the hope that is within us. These are people in 1 Peter who are being threatened with death, who are being intensely persecuted, thrown into jail. And yet, the people who are doing those things to them are going to be looking at them and saying, wait a second, this doesn't add up. Why are you so hopeful? Why are you at peace? Why are you joyous? Well, we need to react to hardship, to mistreatment, to slander a different way than the world reacts to it. We need to react in hope, and may that shine through. We'll pick up there next time. We'll review over those passages. Thank you all for your participation tonight.